Reducing histamine while navigating mold exposure and mold illness can be incredibly helpful to symptoms. And you might be saying, well, I don't really have histamine issues. I don't have the runny nose, the itchy eyes. And I want to stop you right there. Hi, I'm Dr. Lauren Tessier of Life After Mold, and today I'm going to be chatting about how you can reduce histamine reactions with these 5 simple steps when navigating mold illness. Stay tuned. Before we start, I just want to remind everybody that this is not medical advice, and nothing that I cover in today's video is meant to act as diagnosis, treatment, or management of any health condition, and nor does it replace any type of medical opinion or care that would be or could be provided directly by your local medical authority. And of course, as always, all of this is for educational purposes only. So with that out of the way, let's just jump right in. Reducing histamine while navigating mold exposure and mold illness can be incredibly helpful to symptoms. And you might be saying, well, I don't really have histamine issues. I don't have the runny nose, the itchy eyes. And I want to stop you right there. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on this one. The reality is that histamine reactions can look like anything because histamine receptors, the things that actually catch the histamine molecule and then send that signal throughout the body, those are located in nearly every organ in the body. And so because those receptors are there, therefore that signal can be involved in that space. So what we'll see is that there's always the typical like itchy eyes, runny nose, watery eyes, cough, shortness of breath, but anxiety, fatigue, depression, insomnia, joint pain, all of these things can be a direct reaction to histamine. So definitely think about how these could be helpful for what you're specifically navigating. Histamine reactions can happen to mold and its components. I just want to lay that out there for us. But there's so many components of the mold organism itself because, right, it's a cell and then it grows into a big fluffy colony on the inside of a wall somewhere. And so what you're dealing with in these situations is not just like the mycotoxins or, the mold itself, but you really need to think about the granular parts. You're having cell wall components, enzymes, proteins, carbohydrates, even the toxins. You can have an allergic reactivity to the toxins. In fact, there are 72 things that we can react to in molds and fungi that actually have cross-reactivity into other molds. So you might be primed to, let's say, Wallemia in your ductwork. I should say not your quack ducts, in your ductwork. And that might mean that because of this overlap, you might be reactive to the candida that might naturally be in your gut at a low level, or the aspergillus, one of the benign types of aspergillus that might be in a friend's house that you've never interacted or inhaled before. So what I'm getting at here is you might be reactive to molds that you've never seen before. And so this kind of breaks the mold, no pun intended there, of what we think about with allergies. Usually with allergies, we have people think, oh, I have to be exposed to this particular thing one time before my body freaks out that second time. When in actuality, you can be reactive to a component of something, and then the next kind of unalarming thing comes along, it's not going to be an issue. And then that little second thing also has that alarming component. And now suddenly you're looking like you're reactive to something that your body's never seen before. But in actuality, it has that component of the first allergen. So I just want to get that out there for people. You can definitely become reactive to a mold that you have never seen before. The other thing I want to call out here is that mold also has the ability to sensitize the body to non-mold allergens. So what I mean by that is you might have some mold in your biofilms, let's say. It happens for sure. And that might mean that you're suddenly reactive to dairy. That might mean that you're suddenly reactive to carrots. I don't know. The list goes on. What I'm getting at is you can develop these new reactivities to things that your body has previously tolerated. Cosmetics even that your body has previously tolerated could be a reaction of having mold causing what I call immune system chaos in the body. And so that immune system chaos, it's like having a conversation with someone when you're at a very loud concert. You're only going to hear every other word. When we turn up the inflammation in the body and you have that background inflammatory signal, your body's going to get confused. It's the easiest way for me to put it about what it should be going after and what it should be alerting to. And this is a really good example on the surface of how this reactivity can develop to things that, you've previously found safe for your system. So the question becomes, what can you do? Like, what are the 5 simple steps, Lauren? Just tell me already. Of course, the first step that I won't count as a step is you need to address mold illness by first getting out of exposure. You cannot have safe treatment. You can't safely address these issues if you are still exposed. You can get worse, you can waste your time, you can waste your money, and you just can't do it. So there will be different solutions and different things for everybody, and that's why you always have to work with your local physician and your local indoor environmental professional about making the best choices for you. But before you get started on any type of mold illness treatment or anything, you always need to make sure that one has had the exposure component addressed thoroughly. Very simple way of putting it. Now, here's the deal. For these other 5 steps, whether you're still in exposure or out of it, these things should be helpful to help you reduce your overall histamine reactivity. What I want you to imagine, and maybe you've heard me say this before, maybe you've heard other providers talk about this before, is this concept of a toxin bucket. Well, let's call this also a histamine bucket, right? You have a certain amount of histamine that kind of comes into the system, and then your body can only tolerate so much until it overflows. And that overflow is when we really start to get that big histamine reaction in our body. So there are different ways that we can try to quiet that down. We'll start out with number 1. Number 1, I want people to actually, number 1 and number 2 both revolve around diet. And I want people to be very cautious about this because when you start to limit your diet, you easily reduce nutrients, you easily reduce energy sources for healing. And people with mold issues, you tend to have brain fog and you tend to have fatigue. So you'll get overwhelmed easily. And then I've just seen way too many people just start to avoid food. They're like, I can't eat anything, so therefore I'm not going to eat anything. And you can't heal when your body isn't fed. And that is putting the concept of fasting aside. Fasting does have a time and a place, but just not eating all the time and under eating and not supporting your body is going to cause issues for you in the long run. So with the 2 dietary suggestions, step 1 and step 2, that I will suggest, tread carefully. If you don't feel like you have the mental bandwidth to navigate these things, it's okay to not do it. Obviously work with your local physician. You guys will hear me say that over and over again. However, when we're navigating diet, the first thing that you can potentially do is look up resources for low mold and low mycotoxin diet. And so the goal here isn't that you'll magically remove molds from your body by avoiding these foods. This is going to reduce that histamine load, that histamine bucket. Less mold and mycotoxin exposure in the gut is going to mean that your histamine reactivity will be reduced. So here we're just looking to lower the triggers that are coming into the body. The other thing here, step number 2, that's classified in this diet section, is to reduce our histamine-rich foods or histamine-inducing foods. These are 2 different things. However, they often lump them into just like a low histamine diet. And so you might have to avoid vinegars and avocado, and you might not be able to reheat different leftovers or eat any fish that isn't cooked fresh or things like that. These are a little bit more too complex than what I can get into here at the moment. However, there are plenty of resources online that you can go and you can dig up low mold, low mycotoxin diet resources and low histamine diets. So readily accessible, check them out and also look them and really feel into your capability as to whether or not you can do this right now if you have the bandwidth. So those are step 1 and step 2. Step 3 are the antihistamine class of medications. And again, working with your local doctor, yada, 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 I get it, but antihistamines. Now, antihistamines I want to pull this metaphor back in. So the diet was what was going in. Antihistamines are going to be addressing the overflow. They're going to be quieting the splash on the floor, so to speak. That splash on the floor of the histamine overrunning is the symptoms, right? So these antihistamines are going to go and they're going to quiet that overflow. They're going to prevent that overflow from really alerting the rest of the body. And so the antihistamines, they go and they block the receptors, the same receptors that we talked about that exist all throughout the body in every single organ system. And so there's H1 blockers, there's H2 blockers, there's even some H3 blockers, although they're less readily available and they're more off-label use. But antihistamines can play a really, really big role in helping to reduce this histamine reaction when navigating mold illness. So the next step in these 5 simple steps are using mast cell stabilizers. So your mast cells, and of course I've done some videos and some reels about this, so definitely go dig for them. I do have Life After Mold across most social media platforms and even some good mast cell reels on YouTube, so definitely find those. But your mast cell stabilizers, what they do is exactly what they sound like, they stabilize your mast cells. Specifically, they stabilize the outer membrane. And a metaphor I like giving to people is it would be like taking a balloon and dipping it into wax or painting it with Elmer's glue or something like that, giving it a nice structured coating. So that way, when something comes along to try to pop that balloon, when something comes along to try to get that mast cell to and release histamine and all these other things, you're stabilizing the membrane, so it's just less likely to release its contents at like the first sign of a challenge, right? So your mast cell stabilizers, there are just so many. There's tons of natural products that can be used. The most commons are like quercetin and luteolin, but of course there are also pharmaceutical versions that are mast cell stabilizers like ketotifen and cromolyn sodium. With ketotifen, you do need a prescription. You do need to work with a physician. Cromolyn sodium, they do have some over-the-counter options, but those are usually the eye drops and the nasal sprays. However, again, you want to work with your physician and they'll know which mast cell stabilizer is best for you, at what dose, at what timing. Just know that these are an option and there's lots of educational opportunities out there for people to educate themselves on mast cell stabilizers. So always work with your physician on that one. And last but not least, we have our 5th simple step, which is using supplements to help degrade histamine. So this essentially would be, once again, our bucket is run over, this is trying to break up the water, break up the histamine before it ever really gets to cause issues once it leaves the bucket. And so these histamines, there's a few different ones and a few different mechanisms by which you can support this process. There is a supplement called DAO, which is the enzyme that breaks down histamine in the gut. That can be helpful for some people. For other people, it's not as helpful. You could also work with different nutrients that support the enzymes that break down histamine. Some of the enzymes that break down histamine include DAO, HNMT, MAO. The alphabet soup list goes on and on and on. But what you realistically need to know is that there are plenty of nutrients that help those enzymes do their job, which would be breaking down histamine. And some of these nutrients could be zinc, B2, B6, vitamin C, even something called SAMe. But again, you really need to work with a mold literate physician who is going to be able to understand what nutrients are going to be best for you, which nutrients are going to be safe, because some of these nutrients are contraindicated for some issues for people. So we want to make sure that you're safe in whatever you're doing. So again, in closing, I am so glad that you've stuck around to hear all about these 5 simple steps. And, you can consider diet. You can consider the things that block the histamine signal. You can consider things that prevent histamine from being released. And you can also consider the things that help to break down histamine. So with all that being said, if you want to learn more about mast cell activation and mast cells and mold illness and all that good stuff, definitely like, follow, and subscribe. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm so excited to help you find your life after mold.